Jones. It was March 15th, 1982, at Bezar County Hospital in San Antonio, Texas. Genene Jones, a 31-year-old pediatric nurse, had been working the intensive care unit for nearly 2 years. Born in July of 1950 in San Antonio, she completed her nursing education at Brackenridge Hospital School of Vocational Nursing in Austin. Colleagues described her as charismatic, confident, almost magnetic on the pediatric floor. Parents trusted her completely. Doctors relied on her assessments. She seemed devoted to saving babies' lives. But behind that caring facade, something deeply disturbing was happening. A Centers for Disease Control study revealed concerning patterns during her shifts, with mortality rates significantly higher when Genene was working, 10 times higher. Yet she always seemed to be right there, ready to perform heroic resuscitation attempts. She craved the drama, the attention, the rush of being the one to save a dying child, even when she'd been the one who caused the crisis. By 1982, Bexar County Hospital had seen enough suspicious deaths. They quietly asked Genene to resign. She did. Then she immediately found work at a pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas, run by Dr. Kathleen Holland. The victims at both facilities were helpless infants and toddlers whose parents had brought them in for routine care. These weren't children expected to die. They were babies with ear infections, fevers, simple childhood ailments. Genene selected her victims based purely on opportunity and her twisted need for attention. Chelsea Ann McClellan was just 15 months old when her mother brought her to Dr. Holland's clinic in Kerrville on September the 17th, 1982. Chelsea had come in for a routine checkup and immunizations, a healthy, beautiful baby girl. Her mother, Petty McClellan, had no reason to worry. Another victim was Joshua Sawyer, a baby boy in San Antonio. He died under Genene's care at Bexar County Hospital. Each victim was someone's precious child. Each family trusted Genene to care for their baby. Investigation revealed that Genene had administered unauthorized medications to patients in her care. September 17th, 1982, Kerrville, Texas. Dr. Holland's pediatric clinic. Chelsea McClellan's mother held her daughter as Genene Jones prepared the routine immunization. Shortly after receiving treatment, Chelsea experienced a medical emergency. Genene performed CPR while Dr. Holland contacted emergency services. Dr. Holland called 911. They rushed Chelsea to a nearby hospital. At the hospital, Chelsea seemed to stabilize briefly. The doctors couldn't explain what had happened. Dr. Holland suggested they transport Chelsea to a larger facility in San Antonio. Genene volunteered to ride in the ambulance. During transport to San Antonio, Chelsea experienced another medical crisis. She passed away at the hospital. She was 15 months old. Dr. Holland had grown suspicious. The timing was too convenient. She began investigating and discovered Genene's troubling history at Bexar County Hospital. She contacted authorities immediately. Investigators reviewed multiple cases and conducted forensic testing. Evidence showed unauthorized substances had been administered to patients. After Chelsea's death, investigators moved quickly. They obtained a search warrant for Genene's home and found vials of medication stolen from the clinic. On May 5th, 1983, police arrested Genene Jones at her home in San Antonio. She showed no remorse. She seemed almost proud of the attention. She believed she'd been saving babies, not killing them. Prosecutors suspected Genene had killed dozens of infants, but proving each case would be nearly impossible. Medical records from the early 1980s weren't as detailed. Some bodies had been cremated. They focused on the cases they could prove. Genene Jones was charged with murder in the death of Chelsea McClellan and injury to a child in several other cases. And her trial began in January of 1984 in Georgetown, Texas. Prosecutors presented devastating evidence. Medical experts testified about the lethal injections. Parents provided emotional testimony about losing their children. The defense argued that the deaths were natural, that Genene was being scapegoated. The jury didn't buy it. On February 15, 1984, after deliberating for just over 3 hours, they found Genene Jones guilty of murder. The judge sentenced her to 99 years in prison. Later, she received an additional 60 years. Petty McClellan gave a powerful victim impact statement. She described the loss of her daughter and addressed Genene directly about the impact of her actions. Genene Jones is currently 74 years old and incarcerated at the Patrick O'Daniel Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has been behind bars for over 40 years. Because of Texas mandatory release laws from the 1980s, Genene was scheduled to be released in 2018 due to prison overcrowding credits. The families were horrified. In a dramatic legal move, the San Antonio District Attorney charged Genene with the murder of Joshua Sawyer. Faced with a new murder trial, Genene accepted a plea deal in 2018. She pleaded guilty to killing Joshua and received a life sentence. She will not be eligible for parole until 2038, when she would be 88 years old. She has never shown genuine remorse. In prison interviews, she maintains a twisted version of events where she's the victim. Chelsea McClellan would be 44 years old today. She never got to go to kindergarten, never celebrated a sweet 16, never fell in love, and never had children. A healthcare worker they trusted was convicted of taking lives while seeking attention and recognition. With Genene Jones locked away for her twisted crimes in pediatric wards, our next case moves from hospital rooms to a dialysis center in East Texas. This time, the victims were adults who depended on regular medical treatments. The method used was particularly unusual and led to a complex investigation. Before we reveal how investigators caught her, let's meet the nurse who compromised patient safety at a medical facility. Before we continue with the next cases, we want to hear from you. What time are you watching this? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your answers in the comments. 10. Kimberly Clark, Saenz. April 28th, 2008, Lufkin, Texas. Kimberly Clark Saenz was a 47-year-old licensed vocational nurse working at the DeVita Dialysis Center on Timberland Drive. She'd been employed there for several years, responsible for caring for patients who depended on dialysis to survive. These were people with kidney failure, many elderly or chronically ill, who came 3 times a week for treatments that literally kept them alive. Kimberly grew up in the Lufkin area and completed her vocational nursing training locally. On the surface, she seemed competent, but her personal life was unraveling. She was struggling with substance abuse. Her behavior at work had become increasingly erratic. Coworkers noticed her mood swings, her paranoia, her unusual behavior. She'd been disciplined multiple times, and her nursing license had previously been suspended for forging prescriptions. By 2008, Kimberly's behavior had deteriorated significantly. Investigators later determined she had been harming patients in her care. The victims at DeVita were among the most vulnerable people in Lufkin. They had no choice but to undergo dialysis, or they would face serious health consequences. They trusted their nurses completely. Many had been coming to this clinic for years. Marva Roan was 65 years old, a grandmother with a gentle spirit. Clara Strange was 68, a retired teacher who loved gardening. Thelma Metcalf was 69, a church volunteer. Garland Kelly was 61, a veteran. Cora Bryant was 73, a great-grandmother who baked cookies for the dialysis staff. 5 patients lost their lives, and several others were permanently injured. Evidence showed Kimberly had introduced a harmful substance into their treatment equipment. April 28, 2008, started as a routine day at DeVita. Patients arrived for their scheduled treatments and settled into their chairs for the 3-hour process. Dialysis is already uncomfortable. These patients endured it because the alternative was serious health complications. Kimberly was assigned to care for several patients that day. At some point during her shift, investigators later determined she accessed cleaning supplies and prepared unauthorized substances. The first patient experienced a sudden medical emergency. Staff responded immediately, but the symptoms were unusual and didn't match typical complications. Emergency services were contacted, and paramedics arrived and transported the patient to the hospital, where they later passed away. Within days, similar incidents occurred. Another patient under Kimberly's care experienced a sudden medical emergency. Then another, and another. Between April 28th and May 25th, 2008, 5 patients passed away, and several others required emergency medical treatment. The clinic was in crisis. What finally broke the case was the witnesses. Other nurses had noticed Kimberly behaving unusually around the dialysis machines. One nurse saw her administering something into a patient's line when no medication was ordered. Another noticed her handling syringes that didn't come from the medication cart. When doctors tested a surviving patient, they discovered an unauthorized substance in their system. The clinic immediately reviewed security footage and staff assignments. Every single medical emergency had occurred on Kimberly's shift. DeVita administrators contacted the Lufkin Police Department on May 25, 2008. Detectives arrived and began interviewing staff. Multiple nurses reported seeing Kimberly acting suspiciously. When investigators searched the clinic, they found residue from a harmful substance in syringes. They found traces of the same substance in the dialysis machines Kimberly had used. On April 1, 2009, police arrested Kimberly Clark Saenz at her home in Lufkin. She denied everything. She claimed she was being framed. But the evidence was overwhelming. 5 patient deaths in 1 month at a clinic that normally went years between patient deaths wasn't a coincidence. And during questioning, Kimberly showed no emotion, no remorse. Psychologists couldn't provide a clear motive. She gained nothing financially. Her reasoning remained unclear. Kimberly Clark Saenz was charged with 5 counts of capital murder and 5 counts of aggravated assault. Her trial began on March 19, 2012, in Lufkin. Prosecutors presented medical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and physical evidence. The defense argued that the deaths were coincidental, that contamination came from improper cleaning procedures. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On March 30, 2012, they found Kimberly Clark Saenz guilty on all 10 counts. The judge sentenced her to 5 life sentences for the murders, plus 60 years for the assaults. Life without the possibility of parole. Family members wept in the courtroom. Marva Roan's daughter described the impact of losing her mother. She talked about how her mother had trusted Kimberly. The emotional devastation was absolute. Kimberly Clark Saenz is currently 59 years old and incarcerated at the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has been behind bars for nearly 16 years. She will never be released. She will die in prison. She has filed multiple appeals, all denied. She continues to maintain her innocence. She never apologized to the families. She never explained why she did it. Kimberly's sentence brought some closure to the families she had destroyed. But just a few hours south in the Houston area, another serious crime had already occurred 5 years earlier. This case involved teenagers, substance abuse, and a crime that would remain unsolved for nearly 3 years. 4 young people lost their lives in a suburban home. The perpetrator was someone they all knew, someone they trusted. Before we discuss this case, let's examine what happened. 11. Christine Marie Paolilla. July 18, 2003. Clear Lake, Texas, a quiet suburb southeast of Houston. Christine Marie Paolilla was 18 years old and in a downward spiral of drug addiction and rage. She'd grown up in the Clear Lake area and attended Clear Lake High School, where she'd been severely bullied due to alopecia, a condition that caused complete hair loss. She wore wigs to school. Kids mocked her relentlessly. Christine had eventually found acceptance with a group of friends, including Tiffany Rowell, who became her closest confidant. For a while, all her life improved, but then she met Christopher Lee Snyder, a drug dealer several years older. He introduced her to hard drugs, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. The addiction consumed her completely. By 2003, Christine and Christopher were deep in the drug world, desperate for money. Friends from high school barely recognized her anymore. The drugs had rewired her brain, but nobody imagined she was capable of mass murder. The victims were Christine's friends. Tiffany Rowell was 17, Christine's best friend, a vibrant girl planning to attend college. Rachel Kolarudis was 18, Tiffany's close friend, and an athlete with scholarship offers. Marcus Priscilla was 19, Rachel's boyfriend, working construction. Adelbert Nicholas Sanchez was 21, a friend of Marcus's. These four young people were at Tiffany's house in the Clear Creek subdivision that day, just hanging out. It was summer break. Tiffany trusted Christine completely. When Christine called and asked if she could come over, Tiffany said yes without hesitation. What Tiffany didn't know was that Christine and Christopher were planning to rob her. They knew Tiffany's family had money. They were desperate for drug money and willing to betray friendship. But robbery would quickly escalate to murder. Late afternoon, July 18th, 2003. Christine and Christopher arrived at Tiffany's house. They walked in like any normal visit. Tiffany greeted Christine with a hug. The four friends were relaxed, unsuspecting. Then Christine and Christopher pulled out guns. The atmosphere shattered instantly. Screaming. Panic. And as Tiffany begged her best friend to explain what was happening, Marcus moving to shield Rachel, Adelbert froze in shock. Christine and Christopher forced all four victims into a back room. They demanded money, drugs, anything of value. The victims complied, terrified, but still hoping this was just a robbery. But Christine and Christopher had already decided no witnesses could survive. What happened next was pure execution. They shot Tiffany multiple times. They shot Rachel. They shot Marcus. They shot Adelbert, all at close range. One by one, the victims didn't have time to run. They died in that room, betrayed by someone they'd called a friend. Christine and Christopher ransacked the house, then stepped over the bodies and walked out. They drove away like nothing had happened, back to their drug-fueled existence. The bodies weren't discovered until the next day. A friend went to the house and found them, all four shot to death, blood everywhere, young lives snuffed out for drugs and pocket change. Harris County Police and the FBI launched a massive investigation. The brutality suggested a drug-related hit. Investigators interviewed hundreds of people, but the case went cold. Christine and Christopher had left minimal physical evidence. For 3 years, the families waited for justice. They organized vigils. They begged for information. The community lived in fear. Then, in February of 2006, Christopher Snyder committed suicide. Before his death, he confessed details to friends. After he died, one of those friends contacted the police. The confession led investigators directly to Christine Paolilla. On July 18th, 2006, exactly 3 years after the murders, police arrested Christine in San Antonio. She'd been living under a different identity, still using drugs. When confronted with the evidence, she eventually confessed. She admitted being there. She admitted shooting her best friend. Christine Marie Paolilla was charged with 4 counts of capital murder. Her trial began on October 20th, 2008, in Harris County. Prosecutors presented Christopher's confession, Christine's own admission, forensic evidence, and testimony from people she'd bragged to. The defense argued that Christine was under Christopher's control, that she was high and didn't understand what was happening. The jury didn't buy it. On October 30th, 2008, after deliberating for 6 hours, they found Christine Marie Paolilla guilty on all 4 counts. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tiffany Rowell's mother gave a devastating victim impact statement. She talked about Tiffany's dreams of becoming a nurse. She described how Tiffany had defended Christine against bullies. She looked at Christine and asked how someone could murder their best friend. Christine showed no emotion. Christine Marie Paolilla is currently 37 years old and incarcerated at the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has been behind bars for 18 years. She will never be released. Christopher Snyder escaped justice through suicide. In prison interviews, Christine has expressed remorse, though many doubt its sincerity. She claims the drugs made her a different person. But drugs don't make you execute 4 people. Evil does. The Clear Lake Massacre remains one of the most shocking crimes in Houston's history. While Christine Paolilla's quick, brutal murders shocked Texas, our next case involves something far worse. Not hours of violence, but years. 3 years of systematic torture so severe that when the victim was finally rescued, she weighed just 68 pounds. This wasn't a murder case. The victim survived, but what she endured defies comprehension. Before we detail the torture, we need to understand how someone could do this for 3 straight years. 12. Alicia Calderon, 2019. Wiley, Texas, a small suburb northeast of Dallas. Alicia Calderon was a 46-year-old woman living in a mobile home park. From the outside, nothing about her seemed remarkable. And she worked odd jobs she kept to herself. What neighbors didn't know was that Alicia had a deeply sadistic personality and a pattern of financial exploitation. Alicia had a history of manipulating others for money. She had a way of identifying people who were isolated, desperate, or easy to control. Once she had them in her grasp, she dominated them completely. She enjoyed having power over others. And in 2019, she found the perfect victim. By 2022, investigators would discover that Alicia had also stolen $78,000 from an elderly woman's inheritance. She was a predator in every sense. And what she did to Simone Valdez Junkin over 3 years remains one of the most horrific torture cases in modern Texas history. And Simone Valdez Junkin was 24 years old when she moved into Alicia Calderon's mobile home in 2019. Simone was vulnerable. She'd struggled with homelessness. She'd been estranged from her family. When Alicia offered her a room, Simone thought she'd found safety. What began as a simple housing arrangement quickly became a nightmare. Alicia established complete control over Simone. She isolated her from friends and family. She took Simone's identification documents. She controlled when Simone could eat, sleep, or leave. Simone became a prisoner. Simone's family tried to reach her, but Alicia always had excuses. Eventually, the calls stopped. For 3 years, nobody knew what was happening to her. Nobody knew she was being tortured daily in a mobile home park where families lived normal lives just yards away. Yet the torture Simone endured is almost incomprehensible. Alicia would pour boiling water on her, causing severe burns across her body, 3rd-degree burns that blistered and scarred. Simone would scream, beg for mercy, and Alicia would just laugh. The burns covered Simone's arms, legs, and torso. Some became infected. Simone had no access to medical care. Alicia regularly locked Simone in a dog crate, not for hours, for days. Simone, a full-grown adult woman, crammed into a space meant for a large dog, unable to stand, unable to stretch, lying in her own waste. If Simone cried or begged to be let out, Alicia would taunt her, sometimes leaving her locked up even longer. Starvation was another weapon. Alicia controlled all food. She would withhold meals for days. When she did feed Simone, it was minimal, a piece of bread, a cup of water. Over 3 years, Simone's weight dropped from 130 pounds to just 68 pounds. Her body was emaciated, skeletal. Her hair fell out. Her teeth loosened. She was dying slowly. The psychological torture was just as brutal. Alicia constantly told Simone that nobody cared about her, that her family had abandoned her, that she deserved this treatment. She convinced Simone that if she tried to leave, something worse would happen. After 3 years of abuse, Simone's spirit was almost completely broken. But in February of 2022, Simone found a moment when Alicia wasn't watching. She accessed a phone. With shaking hands, she sent a Facebook message to her stepfather. "Please help me. She's killing me. I'm at this address." That message saved her life. Simone's stepfather immediately called 911. Wheatley Police Department officers arrived at Alicia Calderon's mobile home on February 23, 2022. When they entered, they found Simone. An officer later testified that he almost didn't recognize her as human. She weighed 68 pounds. Her body was covered in burns, scars, and bruises. She was dehydrated and malnourished. She could barely speak. They found the dog crate in the back room. Paramedics rushed Simone to a hospital where doctors worked frantically to stabilize her. Doctors said if she hadn't been rescued that day, she would have died within weeks. Alicia Calderon was arrested at the scene. She denied everything, claimed Simone was mentally ill and self-harming. But the evidence was overwhelming. The burns, the crate, Simone's testimony, witnesses who had heard screams, and records showing Alicia had stolen Simone's disability benefits. Alicia Calderon was charged with aggravated assault, causing serious bodily injury and exploitation. Her trial began in October of 2023 in Collin County. Prosecutors presented medical evidence of Simone's injuries, photographs that made jurors gasp and cry, and Simone's own testimony. Simone took the stand and described 3 years of hell. She showed the jury her scars. She explained the crate, the boiling water, the starvation. She looked at Alicia and said, "You tried to kill me, but I survived." The defense argued that Simone's injuries were exaggerated, that she'd had mental health issues. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On October 19th, 2023, they found Alicia Calderon guilty on all counts. There, the judge sentenced her to 75 years in prison. Alicia Calderon is currently 49 years old and incarcerated in a Texas state facility. She has served less than 2 years. She will be eligible for parole when she's in her 90s, meaning she'll almost certainly die in prison. She has shown no remorse. Simone Valdez Junkins survived, but she'll carry the scars forever. She's undergone multiple surgeries to repair damage from the burns and malnutrition. She's in intensive therapy for PTSD. She's working to rebuild her life, but the 3 years in that trailer will haunt her always. She's 30 years old now. She lost her mid-20s to a monster who tortured her for entertainment and money. This case is unusual because the victim lived to testify. Simone endured 3 years of torture that would have killed most people. She survived because Alicia kept her just barely alive, prolonging the suffering as long as possible. But it happened in a Texas mobile home park for 3 years. Alicia Calderon's case shows us that life sentences aren't only given for murder, but our next case returns to murder with a twist. This time, the killer didn't pull the trigger herself. She manipulated someone else to do it. A wealthy husband shot in his own bed, a scheming wife who wanted his millions, and a lover willing to commit murder for her. Before we reveal the twisted manipulation, let's meet the Black Widow of Austin, Texas. Before we continue with the next 4 cases, we want to hear from you. What time are you watching this? Early morning? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your answers in the comments. Now, let's talk about Celeste Beard. 13. Celeste Beard, 1995, Austin, Texas. Celeste Johnson was a 32-year-old former waitress when she married Stephen Beard, a successful 74-year-old television executive and self-made millionaire. They'd met at a country club where Celeste worked. Stephen was wealthy, lonely after his wife's death, and charmed by Celeste's attention, despite the 42-year age gap. Stephen showered Celeste with luxury, a mansion in Westlake Hills, designer clothes, expensive cars, international vacations. Celeste played the role of loving wife perfectly in public, but behind closed doors, she saw Stephen as nothing more than a bank account. She spent money recklessly. She had affairs. She openly mocked Stephen to her friends, and she began planning how to get his money without staying married to him. The answer was murder. By 1999, Celeste had started a secret lesbian affair with Tracy Tarleton, a woman she'd met at a mental health treatment facility. Tracy was emotionally vulnerable, struggling with depression and borderline personality disorder. Celeste manipulated Tracy psychologically, convincing her that Stephen was abusive, that the only way they could truly be together was if Stephen was dead. She twisted Tracy's mind until Tracy believed that killing Stephen was an act of love. Stephen Beard had no idea his wife was plotting his murder. At 74 years old, he was in relatively good health and enjoying retirement. He trusted Celeste completely. He'd changed his will to leave her the bulk of his estate, worth several $1 million. He gave her access to his bank accounts. He believed she loved him. Tracy Tarleton was equally oblivious to how she was being used. She genuinely believed she and Celeste were in love, that they had a future together once Stephen was out of the picture. Celeste encouraged this delusion, making promises, and carefully planting the idea that Stephen needed to die. What Stephen didn't know was that Celeste had been spending his money to fund the relationship with Tracy, buying her gifts, paying for hotel rooms, and building emotional dependency. What Tracy didn't know was that Celeste was using her as a weapon. October 2nd, 1999, 3:45 a.m. Stephen Beard was asleep in his bedroom in the Westlake Hills mansion. Celeste had convinced him to sleep in a separate bedroom. In reality, she needed him isolated and vulnerable. Tracy Tarleton, following weeks of psychological manipulation, entered the Beard property armed with a 20-gauge shotgun. She'd been given a security code by Celeste. She knew exactly which room Stephen was in. Everything had been arranged. Tracy walked into Stephen's bedroom. He was asleep, unaware. She raised the shotgun. She pulled the trigger. The blast tore through Stephen's abdomen. The sound was deafening. Stephen woke up screaming in agony. Blood poured from the massive wound. Tracy panicked and fled. Celeste, allegedly sleeping in another part of the mansion, called 911. She put on a performance, sobbing, hysterical, begging for help. She claimed someone had broken in and shot her husband. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Stephen was still alive, but barely. The shotgun blast had destroyed part of his stomach and intestines. They rushed him to Brackenridge Hospital. Doctors performed emergency surgery. They managed to stabilize him, but the damage was catastrophic. During the months that followed, Stephen remained hospitalized. He underwent multiple surgeries. He developed blood clots. He contracted infections. Celeste visited him, playing the devoted wife. She held his hand. She cried at his bedside, all while counting down the days until he died, and she inherited his fortune. On January 22, 2000, Stephen Beard died from a blood clot, a direct complication of the gunshot wound. He'd suffered for 3.5 months. Celeste appeared devastated at his funeral. Then she started spending Stephen's money at an even faster pace. What Celeste didn't count on was Tracy's guilt. In the months after Stephen's death, Tracy became increasingly unstable. The shooting haunted her. She started drinking heavily, and she began to realize that Celeste was avoiding her, cutting her off now that Stephen was dead and the money was secure. Tracy had committed murder for nothing. In March of 2000, unable to live with the guilt, Tracy Tarleton went to the Austin Police Department and confessed everything. She described how Celeste had manipulated her. She admitted to shooting Stephen and explained that Celeste had orchestrated the entire plan. She turned over love letters, emails, and phone records. Police arrested Celeste Beard at her mansion on March 28, 2000. She denied everything. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed Celeste had been supporting Tracy financially. Witnesses testified about seeing them together. Celeste Beard was charged with capital murder. Her trial began on February 3, 2003 in Travis County. Tracy Tarleton testified against her, describing the manipulation, the promises, and the planning. Prosecutors showed financial records proving Celeste's motive. They presented witnesses who testified about Celeste's affairs. They showed that Celeste had increased Stephen's life insurance policies just months before the shooting. The defense argued that Tracy was lying, that she'd acted alone out of jealousy. The jury didn't buy it. On March 21, 2003, after deliberating for 8 hours, they found Celeste Beard guilty of capital murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison. Stephen Beard's daughters gave emotional victim impact statements. They described their father as a kind, it's a generous man murdered by a woman who pretended to love him. Celeste Beard is currently 58 years old and incarcerated at the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has been behind bars for nearly 25 years. She maintains her innocence, claiming she was framed. She's filed numerous appeals, all denied. She will never be released. She will die in prison. Tracy Tarleton, who cooperated with prosecutors and showed genuine remorse, received a lighter sentence of 20 years. She was released on parole in 2011 after serving 10 years. Stephen Beard would have been 99 years old today. He deserved to live out his golden years in peace. Instead, he was murdered in his sleep by a woman he trusted, all for money. Celeste got exactly what she wanted for a few brief months. Then she lost everything. Her freedom, her luxury, her future. Celeste's manipulation of Tracy was calculated and cold. But our next case involves manipulation of a different kind. 2 high-achieving military academy cadets with bright futures. A teenage girl caught in a love triangle, and a murder so brutal it destroyed 3 families in one night. What makes this case particularly chilling is that the killers were honor students, future military officers, people we are taught to respect. Before we discuss how they lured their victim to a remote field, let's meet the cadet who planned a murder to satisfy her jealous rage. 14. Diane Michelle Zamora, December 4th, 1995. Grand Prairie, Texas. Diane Michelle Zamora was a 17-year-old high school senior and a Naval Academy cadet. She was brilliant, driven, and seemingly destined for success. En valedictorian, track athlete, accepted to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. Her boyfriend David Graham was equally accomplished. He'd been accepted to the Air Force Academy. They were the golden couple. But beneath that perfect exterior, Diane was obsessive, controlling, and consumed by jealousy. When she discovered that David had a brief sexual encounter with another girl, 16-year-old Genene Jones, Diane's world shattered. The betrayal consumed her. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She didn't blame David, she blamed Adrienne, and she decided that the only way to heal from the betrayal was to kill the girl who dared to touch her boyfriend. David, desperate to prove his loyalty to Diane and terrified of losing her, agreed to help murder Adrienne. 2 honor students, future military officers, planned to kill a teenage girl to satisfy jealousy. Genene Jones was just 16 years old. She was a sophomore at Mansfield High School, a cheerleader, a runner on the cross-country team, and a Girl Scout. She was popular, kind, and full of life. She dreamed of becoming a teacher. Her parents adored her. Adrienne's encounter with David Graham was brief and insignificant to her. They'd met at a party. They'd hooked up once. She barely thought about it afterward. She had no idea that David had a girlfriend who was planning to murder her. When David called her on December 3rd and asked if she wanted to hang out, she saw no reason to be suspicious. What Adrienne didn't know was that Diane was sitting next to David when he made that call. They were working together, setting a trap. They'd already decided how they would do it. All they needed was to get Adrienne into the car. Late night, December 3rd, 1995. David picked up Adrienne from her house in Mansfield. She got into his car willingly, thinking they were just going to hang out. Normal teenage stuff. She had no reason to be afraid. He drove toward a remote area near Joe Pool Lake in Grand Prairie. Diane was hiding in the back seat, lying flat so Adrienne wouldn't see her. When David pulled the car into a secluded spot near the lake, Adrienne probably started to feel uneasy. But before she could react, Diane sat up from the back seat and attacked. David grabbed Adrienne from the front. Diane climbed over the seat and started hitting her with a barbell weight she'd brought from home. Adrienne screamed. She fought back desperately. She was fighting for her life. Nay, but she was overpowered by two people. David wrapped his hands around her neck and broke it with a sharp twist. Adrienne's body went limp, but she was still breathing. Diane and David dragged Adrienne's barely conscious body out of the car and into a field. They needed to finish what they had started. Diane pulled out a gun. She shot Adrienne twice in the head at point-blank range. Blood, brain matter. The girl's body collapsed into the dirt. She was dead, 16 years old, killed for a one-time hookup that meant nothing. Diane and David left Adrienne's body in that field. They got back in the car and drove back to their normal lives. They went to school the next day. They acted like nothing had happened. They thought they'd gotten away with murder. Adrienne's body was discovered by a farmer on December 5th, 1995, in the field near Joe Pool Lake. She'd been shot in the head twice. Her neck was broken. Police had no immediate suspects. For 9 months, the case went cold. Diane and David continued their lives at their respective military academies. They thought they were untouchable. But then David made a critical mistake. He started dating another girl at the Air Force Academy. During an argument, he confessed to killing someone. Instead of being impressed, the girl was horrified and immediately reported him to the police. In September of 1996, Texas Rangers arrested both David Graham and Diane Zamora. David confessed quickly, implicating Diane as the mastermind. Diane initially denied everything, then eventually admitted to planning and participating in Adrienne's murder. Diane Michelle Zamora and David Graham were both charged with capital murder. They were tried separately. Diane's trial began in February of 1998 in Fort Worth. Prosecutors presented David's confession, physical evidence from the crime scene, and testimony about Diane's obsessive jealousy. The defense argued that Diane was under David's influence. The jury didn't accept that narrative. On February 11th, 1998, the jury found Diane Michelle Zamora guilty of capital murder. Because she was 17 at the time of the crime, she wasn't eligible for the death penalty. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. David Graham was convicted separately and received the same sentence. Adrienne Jones's parents gave heartbreaking victim impact statements, and her mother described tucking Adrienne into bed the night before she disappeared, never imagining it would be the last time. Diane Michelle Zamora is currently 47 years old and incarcerated at the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has been behind bars for 28 years. She will never be released. David Graham is serving his sentence in a separate facility. They will both die in prison. Diane has filed multiple appeals, all denied. In prison interviews, she's expressed what she claims is remorse, but many question its sincerity. Adrienne Jones would be 46 years old today. She would have graduated high school, gone to college, maybe become a teacher like she dreamed. She might have married, had children. Instead, she was murdered at 16 by two jealous teenagers who thought their honor student status put them above consequences. Diane Zamora took it away for nothing. Diane's case shows us that even the most accomplished, respected young people can commit horrific acts when consumed by jealousy. But our next case is more recent and equally shocking. A professional cyclist murdered by a yoga instructor who couldn't handle romantic rejection. An international manhunt spanning 2 continents. Plastic surgery attempts to change her appearance. And a dramatic escape during trial. Before we discuss the murder and the manhunt, let's meet the woman who fled to Costa Rica after killing a rising sports star. Out of the 6 cases we've covered so far, which one has shocked you the most? Comment below. We have 2 more cases to go, and trust me, that you won't want to miss them. 15. Kaitlin Marie Armstrong, May 11th, 2022, Austin, Texas. Kaitlin Marie Armstrong was a 34-year-old yoga instructor living with her on and off boyfriend, Colin Strickland, a professional cyclist. To friends and acquaintances, Kaitlin seemed normal enough. She taught yoga. She was into fitness. Nobody suspected that beneath the calm yoga teacher exterior, Kaitlin was dangerously obsessive and increasingly unstable. Caitlin's relationship with Colin had become toxic. They had broken up multiple times. During one of their breakups, Colin had dated another professional cyclist named Mariah Mo Wilson. It was brief. When Colin and Kaitlin got back together, Colin ended things with Mo, but Kaitlin couldn't let it go. She was consumed by jealousy. She stalked Mo online. She tracked Colin's movements, and when she discovered that Mo was coming to Austin for a cycling event and planned to see Colin, Caitlin's jealousy turned murderous. By early May of 2022, Kaitlin had decided that the only way to keep Colin was to eliminate her perceived rival. She began planning Mo Wilson's murder, Mariah. Mo Wilson was 25 years old and a rising star in professional cycling. She had recently won multiple races and was being scouted for major sponsorships. She was talented, dedicated, and loved by everyone in the cycling community. She had no enemies. She was in Austin for the Gravel Locos race. She was staying with a friend and had planned to meet up with Colin briefly before the race. It was innocent, friendly, and nothing romantic. Mo had no idea that Kaitlin was tracking her every move. Kaitlin had access to Colin's phone and messages. She knew Mo was in town. She knew where Mo was staying. She knew Colin had seen Mo earlier that day. And she decided that Mo had to die. Mo and Kaitlin had never met. There was no confrontation, no argument, no history between them. Mo was simply the woman Caitlin's boyfriend had briefly dated. Evening of May 11th, 2022, Mo Wilson returned to the East Austin home where she was staying with her friend. She'd had dinner with Colin earlier. They'd caught up, talked about cycling, and said goodbye. It was friendly. Mo was in good spirits, preparing for the race. She had no reason to expect what was about to happen. Around 9 p.m., Kaitlin Armstrong arrived at the house. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera shows her vehicle pulling up, and she'd tracked Mo's location using Colin's phone. She knew exactly where to find her. She grabbed a gun and walked up to the house. What happened next was quick and brutal. Kaitlin entered the home and confronted Mo. There may have been a brief exchange. Then Kaitlin pulled out the gun and shot Mo 3 times. 2 bullets to the head, 1 to the chest. At close range, execution style. Mo collapsed. She was dead within minutes. Kaitlin turned and walked out, got back in her vehicle, and drove away. Mo's friend discovered her body when she came home about an hour later. Blood everywhere. Mo lying on the bathroom floor, shot multiple times. She called 911 immediately. Mo Wilson, a talented 25-year-old athlete with her entire life ahead of her, had been murdered. Austin police immediately launched a homicide investigation. Once they pulled surveillance footage from the neighborhood and saw a vehicle matching Kaitlin Armstrong's car. They interviewed Colin Strickland, who admitted that Mo had been in town. When pressed about Kaitlin, Colin revealed that she'd been increasingly jealous and unstable. Police tracked Caitlin's phone location. It placed her at the crime scene at the time of the murder. On May 13th, 2022, police interviewed Kaitlin. She denied being at the house. But when confronted with the evidence, her story fell apart. Police were preparing to arrest her when she did something shocking. She fled. Within 24 hours, Kaitlin sold her Jeep, cut and dyed her hair, and purchased a plane ticket using a fake passport and her sister's name. She flew from Austin to Newark, then to San Jose, Costa Rica. By the time police obtained an arrest warrant, Kaitlin was already out of the country, beginning an international manhunt that would last 43 days. In Costa Rica, Kaitlin continued trying to hide. She changed her appearance further, even reportedly undergoing plastic surgery. She used fake names. She stayed in remote beach towns. She thought she could disappear forever. But the U.S. Marshal Service and the FBI were closing in. On June 29, 2022, U.S., Marshals arrested Kaitlin Armstrong at a hostel in Santa Teresa Beach on the Nicoya Peninsula. She'd been living under an assumed name, working at a yoga retreat. When officers identified themselves, she initially tried to pretend she didn't know who they were. But fingerprints don't lie. She was extradited back to Texas. Miss Kaitlin Marie Armstrong was charged with the first-degree murder. Her trial began in October of 2023 in Austin. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: surveillance footage, phone location data, ballistics matching her gun to the bullets that killed Mo, and evidence of her flight to Costa Rica. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone, Kaitlin attempted to escape during the trial. On October 11, 2023, while being escorted from the courthouse, she broke free from guards and ran. She was gone for about 30 minutes before being recaptured. The escape attempt added 10 years to her eventual sentence. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that Kaitlin had fled out of panic, not guilt. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On November 16th, 2023, they found Kaitlin Marie Armstrong guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison for the murder, plus 10 additional years for the escape attempt. Mo Wilson's family gave emotional victim impact statements. Her mother described Mo's kindness, her athletic dedication, and the future that was stolen. Kaitlin Marie Armstrong is currently 36 years old and incarcerated in a Texas state prison. She's been behind bars for less than 2 years. She will never be released. The international manhunt, the plastic surgery, the escape attempt during trial, all of it points to a guilty conscience. Colin Strickland has had to live with the knowledge that his relationship choices indirectly led to Mo's death. He's given interviews expressing guilt and sorrow, that though he bears no legal responsibility. Mo Wilson would be 28 years old today. She would likely be competing at the highest levels of professional cycling, maybe preparing for Olympic trials. Instead, she was murdered in a bathroom in Austin, shot 3 times by a jealous woman she'd never even met. A scholarship fund was established in her name to support young female cyclists. Kaitlin Armstrong threw away her own life and ended Mo's because she couldn't handle the fact that her boyfriend had dated someone else. Kaitlin's desperate flight to Costa Rica shows how far someone will go to avoid facing what they've done. But our final case involves a different kind of desperation. Financial desperation, a nurse drowning in debt, a husband with a massive life insurance policy, and a murder staged to look like a break-in gone wrong. What the killer didn't count on was a confidential informant wearing a wire and a video that would seal her fate. Before we discuss the staged crime scene, let's meet the woman who shot her husband as he slept, and then played the grieving widow. 16. Darlene Gentry. November 9th, 2005. Robinson, Texas, a small town near Waco. Darlene Gentry was a 32-year-old registered nurse working at a local hospital. She and her husband, Wayman Keith Gentry, had been married for 6 years and had 3 young sons together. From the outside, they seemed like a normal middle-class family. Keith worked as a corrections officer. Darlene worked as a nurse. Nobody suspected that behind closed doors, Darlene was drowning in debt and planning her husband's murder. The financial pressure on Darlene had been building for years. She'd made poor investments. She'd racked up credit card debt. The family was barely making ends meet, but Darlene had discovered something that seemed like a solution. Keith had a $500,000 life insurance policy through his job. If Keith died, Darlene would receive $500,000. All her debts would disappear. All she had to do was kill her husband and make it look like a random crime. By late 2005, Darlene had decided that Keith had to die. She began planning the murder, and she enlisted help from a man named Robert Pavelka, who would later become a confidential informant. Waymon Keith Gentry was 31 years old, a dedicated corrections officer and a loving father to his 3 sons. He had no idea his wife was planning to kill him. He trusted Darlene completely. They'd been married for 6 years. They'd built a life together. Yes, they had financial stress, but lots of families struggle with money. Keith thought they'd work through it together. He never imagined Darlene saw him as nothing more than an insurance payout. Keith's colleagues described him as reliable, friendly, and committed to his work. His family adored him. His sons looked up to him. He coached their little league teams. He attended school events. He was present in their lives, and Darlene was planning to take that away from them, to make those boys fatherless so she could pay off her credit cards. The night before his murder, Keith had no warning. He went to bed like any other night, kissed his wife, fell asleep in his own bed, never suspecting that Darlene had decided this would be his last night alive. November 9th, 2005, 6:15 a.m. Keith Gentry was asleep in his bed. Darlene had already sent their 3 sons to a relative's house under some pretext. The house was quiet. She grabbed a gun. She walked into the bedroom where her husband lay sleeping, and she shot him in the head at point-blank range. The gunshot shattered the early morning quiet. Blood sprayed across the pillow, the sheets, the wall. Keith never woke up. He was alive, but brain dead instantly. He would never regain consciousness. Darlene immediately went into the next phase of her plan. She staged the scene to look like a break-in. She messed up the house. She broke a window from the outside. She made it look like someone had forced entry. Then she called 911, putting on a performance of a terrified wife whose husband had just been shot by an intruder. Operators could hear her screaming, crying, begging for help. She said someone had broken into their house and shot Keith. She said she didn't see who it was. Paramedics and police arrived within minutes. When first responders entered the house, they found Keith in the bed, shot in the head, unresponsive. They also noticed something odd. There were no signs of forced entry that made sense. The broken window looked staged. The house hadn't been ransacked. Keith still had his wallet. Valuables were still in plain sight. Nothing had been stolen. It didn't add up. Keith was transported to a hospital in Waco and placed on life support. Doctors determined he was brain dead. Darlene, playing the grieving wife, signed the paperwork to remove life support. On November 12th, 2005, Keith Gentry was pronounced dead. Yes, Darlene collected on the life insurance policy almost immediately. But investigators weren't buying Darlene's story. The stage break-in was too obvious. The lack of theft made no sense. And when they looked into Darlene's finances, they discovered the massive debt and the life insurance policy. They just needed proof. That proof came from Robert Pavelka, a man Darlene had confided in. Pavelka initially kept quiet, but eventually his conscience got the better of him. He contacted police and agreed to become a confidential informant. He wore a wire and recorded conversations with Darlene. In those recordings, Darlene admitted to killing Keith. She also told Pavelka she'd thrown the gun into a pond near their property. Police obtained a search warrant and brought Darlene to the pond under the guise of helping them search for evidence. What she didn't know was that they were videotaping her. The video shows Darlene subtly gesturing toward a specific area of the pond, essentially showing them where she'd hidden the gun. Divers recovered the weapon exactly where she'd indicated. Ballistics confirmed it was the gun that killed Keith. On November 27, 2005, police arrested Darlene Gentry at her home. She denied everything at first, but when confronted with the wire recordings and the video evidence, her story crumbled. She eventually admitted to shooting Keith, but claimed it was self-defense, a lie that nobody believed. Darlene Gentry was charged with murder. Her trial began in February of 2007 in McLennan County. Prosecutors presented the wire recordings where Darlene admitted to the murder, and they showed the video of her leading them to the gun. They presented financial records proving the motive. They brought in experts who testified that the break-in had been staged. The defense argued that Darlene had been in an abusive relationship and shot Keith in self-defense. They claimed she panicked and staged the scene. The jury didn't accept that narrative. There was no history of domestic violence. Keith's family and friends testified that he'd never been abusive. On February 23, 2007, after deliberating for less than 5 hours, the jury found Darlene Gentry guilty of murder. The judge sentenced her to 60 years in prison. Keith's family gave heartbreaking victim impact statements. His mother described her son as a gentleman who loved his boys more than anything. The 3 boys had to grow up without their father because their mother valued money more than family. Keith's family also fought for and won custody of the 3 boys, obtaining a court order that prevented Darlene from having any contact with her own children. Darlene Gentry is currently 52 years old and incarcerated at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has been behind bars for nearly 20 years. She will be eligible for parole in February of 2037, when she will be 64 years old. Whether she'll actually be granted parole remains to be seen. The nature of her crime, murdering her husband for insurance money while their children slept at a relative's house, may weigh heavily against her. Her 3 sons are now adults. They grew up without either parent, raised by Keith's family. They've had to live with the knowledge that their mother murdered their father. The boys have reportedly had no contact with Darlene since her conviction. The betrayal runs too deep. Keith Gentry would be 51 years old today. He would have watched his sons grow up, graduate high school, maybe start families. Instead, he was shot in the head while sleeping, killed by the woman he trusted most, all because she saw him as worth more dead than alive. And Darlene, who thought she'd solved her financial problems, traded her freedom and her family for prison walls and permanent shame. That brings us to the end of Part 2. 8 more Texas women, 8 more life sentences, 16 total cases across both parts, families destroyed, lives stolen, justice served, but at what cost? So, here's what we want to know. Out of all 8 cases we covered in Part 2, which one shocked you the most? Was it Genene Jones, the nurse who killed babies for attention? Kimberly Saenz, who injected bleach into dialysis patients? Christine Paolilla, who massacred her best friend and 3 others? Alicia Calderon, who tortured a woman for 3 years? Celeste Beard, who manipulated her lover into murdering her husband? Diane Zamora, the honor student who killed a teenage girl out of jealousy? Kaitlin Armstrong, who fled to Costa Rica after murdering a cyclist? Or Darlene Gentry, who shot her husband for insurance money? Drop your answer in the comments. And here's another question. Did you prefer Part 1 or Part 2? Which set of cases was more shocking? Let us know below. And if you haven't watched Part 1 yet, go back and watch it. Trust me, those cases are just as disturbing. Now tell us, what time are you watching this? Are you watching in the morning with your coffee, late at night before bed? And where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing our viewers from all over the globe. These stories are heavy, they're dark, they're painful to hear, but they're real. These victims were real people with real families who still grieve every single day. Do you think justice was truly served in these cases? Or do the sentences feel too light for the crimes committed? When a nurse kills babies, when a woman tortures someone for 3 years, When teenagers execute their friends, is life in prison enough? Or should some crimes carry harsher punishment? Let us know your thoughts. Now here's the big question. Which state should we cover next? Florida, New York, Ohio? Or maybe a state we haven't thought of? Drop your suggestions in the comments and we'll make it happen. If you made it this far, hit that like button, share and subscribe for more true crime cases. We've got plenty more shocking stories coming your way. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.